Wow, that was good, man. That's perfect timing, brother. That's perfect timing. Guys, I love worshiping with y'all. Thank you guys for being here at Unite. We are continuing our series called Shalom. If you weren't here last week, I know there's a couple of you new people here, and it was really good meeting you. If we haven't met, please come see me after. I'd love to meet you. But we are going to continue this series that's going to lead us up to Easter, which we're not going to be here on Easter, but that Easter story talking about the death and resurrection of Jesus. So if you weren't here last week, go check out our YouTube channel. You can see the first message, and we're just going to continue that today. So before we get started, I got questions throughout this talk. Have you ever worked yourself up to thinking that something was going to go so good, but it kind of disappointed you, where you ended up saying like, oh man, that's it? There are a couple of examples, and maybe you can connect to some of them. But my buddy and I, we lived in New York. Oh, I lived in New York most of my life, and we would go surfing after school whenever we can, especially in the winter. We just thought it was so cool. And we would check the forecast like the night before, see the waves, see what was going on. And if there was any sort of waves, we would drive from school, right after school, to the beach. It was like 40 minutes. And we had to get there before the sun went down. So like in the winter, the sun goes down at like 3 p.m.? Something like that. So like really, really early. But the best part about it, was kind of just like working ourselves up. Like that night we would get prepared, we get our wetsuits, we'd load everything in our cars. That morning before school, we would watch the surf cams in math class and science class. Don't ever do that, like pay attention in class. And then we would get food right after school, and then we would head to the beach, 40 minutes to Long Beach. And once we got there, we got our wetsuits on. Then we run up to the boardwalk to see the waves, and we're like, that's it? I'll tell you, 95% of the time, that's what happened. There was no waves. We checked the cams all day. There was nothing there. We're like, man, that's it. And we were so disappointed. And as I was thinking through that, I was like, you know what? That also happens like when I decide to cook a meal for Haley and I. Like I would Google it, and it looks gorgeous. You know what I'm saying? Like you Google recipes. That's all. I call myself a cook because of Google, and it tastes horrible. So I'm like, man, that's it? Like I thought it was gonna look good. I thought it was gonna taste good. The first time I bought my house, I wanted something so badly to move out and just to have my own place, and it was like in 2001 I got it, so it was perfect timing, and I wanted to get in there like as soon as possible. And 2 weeks later, I'm putting in toilets, I have a mortgage, I'm in debt, and all the other things are going wrong. I'm like, that's it? Like it was supposed to be something fun, right? And then I looked forward to graduating high school more than any of you, I promise. More than any other person, I looked forward to graduating. And once I did, I was like, oh, that's it? I got more responsibilities? What's next? And to go a bit deeper, in my own spiritual life, I say similar things. Like there are weeks where I'm stressed and I would recognize my need for Jesus. And I would listen to a sermon or be a part of a worship service or even listen to a podcast on a run, and I'm still kind of left pretty empty, and I'm like, God, that's it? There was a void deep within me for a long time that I tried to confront with the things of this world, the promises of this world, thinking that I will be at peace in my life, that these things will fulfill me, but all of them couldn't produce that fulfillment that only came from God himself. In our lives, it seems like we are never satisfied. Could you agree with that? Always chasing the next best thing, having the newest iPhone, the newest Apple Watch. I'm just going to Apple. That's the first thing that came to my mind. It's usually, they are great at targeting us. We will get the new iPhone. While God is standing in front of us saying, I have all you need. I have all you need. So we all have this deep longing within us that we try to fill. And last week I mentioned sin causes this need, a need for shalom, a need for what we call wholeness, a need for completeness, a need for perfection, because God created us with this completeness at one point in the Garden of Eden, and then it was gone. And what that means is that there will always feel like, because of that, because of the fall in the Garden of Eden, because the forbidden fruit was eaten, that means that there will always be this feeling that something is missing within us when we live a life that is not in line with God's will. We will always feel like the building blocks of a stone wall that's missing a block about to crumble. We are all missing something since that fall of creation, since the forbidden fruit was eaten. And we're left with brokenness, we're left with heartbreak, we're left with pain. That's where we left off last week. Not really on a high note. Hoping this week's a little bit better. But here's the thing though. And the good news is that God promises restoration for that need. God promises to repair that for us. Whether it be that feeling that you get to the need to fit in, that for people to like you more, for people to notice you more, the need to act differently in specific places, in front of different people, the need for love, the fulfillment in your life, whatever that may be. Remember, in the place of Shalom that God created for Adam and Eve, there was no need, there was no wants, there was no longings. Even though it was broken long ago, there was a state of shalom. And that's what God intended. And that's what he continues to intend for us. And started to repair that right away. God knew that we can never be fully satisfied without him. So we're going to jump in and I'm going to ask this question. So how has God been restoring shalom since the Garden of Eden? That's what we're talking about today. Now, I want to preface real quick. The answer to that question is this whole Old Testament of the Bible. Well, it's the whole Bible. And so I'm going to sum it up. So it might be a little confusing. And I want you afterwards to ask me something that you're confused about or ask your breakout group leader, because we are truly just summing up the whole Bible or the whole Old Testament. So we left off with Adam and Eve giving into temptation. That temptation was from a snake, right? Therefore, breaking shalom for the rest of humanity. And they hid from God in the cool of the day, and right away, God showed them compassion and grace. How? He clothed them, and he sent them out of the garden so that one day we can live in shalom with him forever and ever. And I may have missed this, but there's what I said shalom was last week. Shalom is the joining together of God, humanity, and all of creation in fulfillment, wholeness, goodness, and completeness. He came to restore that wholeness, that completeness and perfection where we have no more longings and no more needs and no more wants. Since the day they were sent out of the garden, God has been restoring his creation back to him. And the whole Old Testament post-garden is a story of God pursuing us, reestablishing this shalom, this perfection, the completeness for his children. And he does that by giving us his presence. To say this, that my presence is better. And how does he do that? So the chapter after Genesis, the book after Genesis is Exodus. And that's where we see, try to bear with me, okay? Again, it can get confusing. But this is where we see the establishment of what we call the tabernacle. It was a place modeled after the Garden of Eden. So for God to tell Moses, hey, build this tabernacle looking like the Garden of Eden, that means that God wants to be with us, right? He wants to be in our presence. He didn't just, exile Adam and Eve out of the garden and say, like, all right, I don't want to be with you anymore because you sinned. No. God's like, I want to be with you. So here, set up this tabernacle. And it's so cool. The tabernacle, it faced east. The entrance faced east like the Garden of Eden. It was guarded. It had the gold, had the tree of life, which was the lampstand. It had the tree of knowledge, which was the law in the tabernacle. And God's dwelling in the tabernacle was a step towards restoration of paradise. It's a place, this is what it was. It was a place where God was able to dwell among his people. Remember, in the garden, God was able to dwell among Adam and Eve. But when they sinned, he couldn't dwell with them because he couldn't dwell in sin. So a pillar of cloud and fire shows that he was there, and the people of God would camp around the tabernacle. And when they'd wake up in the morning, they'd see his presence. Similarly to the Garden of Eden, God instructs men to work and keep the temple. in God's presence. And the same job description was given to Adam and Eve in the garden. All in the plan to restore shalom to us. So God never gave up on them. God did not want to be away from his children. So be reminded today of this, that he still chooses you. And some of you need to hear that. I needed to hear that this week. He still chooses you. All of you, not a future version of you, but who you are now in your mess and in your brokenness. So why do I talk about this? Because God made a plan. He didn't wait. He quickly started to restore us back to him. And now, as he is doing that, what is our response? What is our response to him restoring this perfection back to us? Here's the problem. We put it in our own hands to restore shalom. We put it in our own hands to fill us up. We try to make ourselves feel whole and feel complete. And when something doesn't work, what do? We move on to something else. Can you guys relate to that? I know I can. This convicted me this week. And that poses a question which I'd love for you to talk about in your breakout group. So what makes you happy? It's great that things make you happy. I want that too. I want things in our lives to make us happy, but how much do we cling onto those things? And has it ever failed you before? Did it leave you empty, or did it leave you happy forever? So I want to talk about an example of someone in the Bible who had literally everything, but realized that every earthly thing was not enough. And his name was King Solomon. Have you ever heard of King Solomon? Good guy. Some of you may have heard of him. He was the son of King David, the guy who defeated Goliath. And what some of us may not know about King Solomon was that his name derived from the word shalom. Derived from the word shalom, which means complete, which means whole, fulfilled, perfection. This word that we're focusing on in this series, Solomon literally means shalom. And who but this guy would know what true shalom is, right? Who but this guy would know the secret of being completely filled and whole? 2 Chronicles 9:22-23 says this: King Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth. All the kings of the earth sought audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom God had put in his heart. You see, he asked God for wisdom, and God gave it to him. God gave him wisdom, and he gave him wealth. And eventually, this is again summing everything up. Eventually, Solomon took all of that wealth and wisdom, and he used it for his own pleasure. So this man had everything the people in this day could have ever wanted, even us, but maybe not this first part. He had 700 wives. He had all the money in the world. He had the greatest crib, almost 9 stories high. It's like a hotel, but he lives in it. With 700 wives, you probably need that many floors. He inherited the wealthiest, most powerful empire on earth at that time in human history, and he decides to test it out, right? So he keeps wisdom, but man, this dude goes hard. He starts to party. He puts the greatest parties on ever. He kills the best animals for food. He invites all of his friends. He one-ups it. He makes the parties better, bringing in live bands, the best drinks, the best food, the most beautiful home. And then he started growing out of these parties, and he started dabbling on the business side. He started to invest in, and build these vineyards and homes. And then he got older, and he gives himself over to leisure. He gives himself over to comfort, and he's just hanging with the things that he likes around him. All for the purposes of trying to find a sense of wholeness in his life. Having everything the world could offer him, he concludes toward the end of his life that it was all meaningless. Or what he says, a chasing after the wind. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 9-11 said this. And this is King Solomon speaking. I became greater by far, far more than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless. A chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Listen, he didn't withhold himself from fleshly desires. That means, could you imagine getting everything you ever wanted? It sounds great to start. But Solomon is saying there was nothing gained from that. It was meaningless because those things weren't of eternal value. Those things are going to perish. Because I'm going to perish one day and they're going to be left behind. What are those things then? Another thing you could talk about in your breakout group. What are those things that are of eternal value that we can invest in? Maybe it's somebody. Maybe it's the way that we love. Maybe it's the way that we care for a group of people or someone specifically in your life. And here are some great theologians of our time. They spoke of the same matter. One is Jim Carrey. He says, I think everyone should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so that they can see that it's not the answer. Another great theologian, Tom Brady. There's times where I'm not the person that I want to be. Why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings? Obviously, this was a while ago. And still think there's something greater out there for me. I mean, maybe a lot of people would say, hey, man, this is what it is. I reached my goal, my dream, my life. Me, I think, God, it's got to be more than this. I mean, this can't be what it's all cracked up to be. I mean, I've done it. I'm 27. And what else is there for me? It's crazy to think that we get to hear the words of King Solomon and in God's word of the truth that it's not all it's cracked up to be. And even the secular world, the people outside who don't even know who Jesus is or have a relationship with him are saying, it's not all it's cracked up to be. A striving after the wind. And to quote the man who had it all, it was all meaningless. And here's why this relates to us. We are constantly chasing after things that we believe will bring us shalom. We chase after things that will fill that gap deep within us, deep within our hearts, that we believe will complete us. The gap that was created in the Garden of Eden because the forbidden fruit was eaten. And we love being our own God, deciding what is best for us, but how has that worked? How has that worked for you? The decisions we make that we believe will make us happy, are we fulfilled with those things? Later on in Solomon's life, he builds this temple in Jerusalem, just like the tabernacle, where God's people can worship him and God can dwell with his people. But he recognized after chasing shalom with the things of this world, it didn't work. So he needed God's presence. And this is what happens. The people, they gather around the temple, they get to be in God's presence, and they celebrate his presence for a moment, and then they find their own way. And that's what we read in the Bible. And so many times if you're reading that, you're like, man, why can't you just obey God or just be happy that he's there? Well, don't we do that too? I know you may know what I'm talking about. I mean, I went to a summer camp when I was 14 years old, and I gave my life to Christ. And if you've heard my story, I mean, I say with quotes, because there was a girl I liked and she gave her life to Christ. I'm like, let's both give our lives to Christ and then we'll date. So it didn't work out, but I went there but I was on a high for Jesus for 2 or 3 weeks and I was celebrating that, and then I eventually started going my own way. But I'll tell you, those were a good 2 or 3 weeks chasing after God. But just like these Israelites, it only lasted for a moment because I wanted to chase after everything else in this world. So what does God do with that response? He still moves towards us. He still chases us and continues to establish the temple. And they turn their back on him again and again and again because they think they're a better God than God himself, because I thought I was a better God than God himself. And why do we do this? Why do we constantly chase after popularity, acceptance, and from others, fame? Maybe when you get older, it could be cars or friends, Amazon purchases. Oh my gosh, that one button click. I know I'm gonna really sound like a youth pastor, but like that is dangerous. That is dangerous. Thinking that these things will give us a sense of shalom that was broken in the garden. And we always have that one more perspective, right? Like if I can only have one more day on vacation, or if I can only get this car, I really feel the freedom, right? Let me tell you, if you're first to get the car, you're gonna be driving everybody around. It doesn't really feel like freedom. You gotta pick everyone up. If I can only be 13, if I can only be 17 years old, graduate, finish college, get my dream job, have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, I'll be fulfilled. Climb the ladder of success. How far up that ladder do you have to go before it ends or you die? Chasing after the wind. When do we stop striving? And if we're not careful, we'll run our whole lives on a treadmill and never actually get to the life that God promised us. I'm going to end here. I'm going to ask Tillman to come up, and we're going to worship in a second, and we're going to sing these lyrics that God is chasing after us. But I really want us to grasp what those words mean, what those words look like in your life. But know this, God is desperately calling you home. Desperately calling you home. He's saying, stop running. Stop running towards all these other things that you believe is going to fix your problems or that you believe is going to fix your family's problems. Stop running because my presence is enough. Psalm 4:7 says, you have filled my heart with great joy. It is greater than the joy of people who have lots of grain and fresh wine. David understood that the key to joy, the key to a filled life is God himself. We need to stop chasing after this shalom. God has been telling us since the very beginning, I am enough. Since the beginning, God's been saying, all you need is me. And that's that overarching message for today. But we, just like the Israelites, are believing that everything else will fill us up. So we turn from him. And God knew that we couldn't do it on our own. He knows that. And so to truly draw us to him, he sends his only son into a world of brokenness, to people who don't deserve it, to restore shalom once and for all. His son, born of a virgin, to live in a broken world, to die a horrific death on a cross to bring me wholeness, completeness. That's how God restores us to him. His son. That's what I'm so excited to talk about next week with you. I'm going to challenge you to come back so you can hear more about Jesus and what he has done. He's chasing after you. I pose this question, what are you chasing after? First, what are you trying to fill in your life? What's working and what's not working? God loves you so much. He loves you so, so much. And he says these things because sometimes I feel like I'm yelling at you. Like, guys, you need to know that what you were chasing after is wrong. It's not like completely wrong. Like it's good that I think it's good that you can, strive to get into college and you want to study and stuff like that. That's great. I'm not saying that. But God is continuing to say, my presence is enough. My love is enough for you. Because God knows that if you chased after anything else but him in your life, it will fail you. Now, I'm a walking testimony of that. There are many adults and even students in here that can testify to that we have chased after things of this world that we thought could fulfill us, that we thought can complete us, that we thought can fill in that gap, and it fails us. every single time. So God says, I do this and I say this because I love you, because I care about you. I'm going to restore shalom, he says. You can't do it on your own. He's chasing after you. What or who are you chasing after? Let's pray and worship together. God, thank you so much for who you are. Thank you for these promises. Thank you for loving us so much to say that nothing in this world will fulfill us